Hey guys, so this is our first video and it is going to be on fish. And so with fish, it's a pretty long lecture. It takes two um, meetings to get through it. So I'm going to divide it into two videos so I'm not talking at you forever. So we'll just cover fish anatomy and physiology today in this video, and then we'll cover the different types of fish in the next video. So when we talk about fish and fishes, what term are we using? Fish can be singular or plural. You can talk about one type of fish, like the goldfish is a fish. If you want to talk about goldfish and betta fish, then it's fishes because it's more than one species. Um, we have great links in all the PowerPoints that I usually show you in face-to-face lecture. I want y'all to be able to see these. So when you download the lecture PowerPoints to your device and you put them on slideshow, you can click the links and get them to work. They're not going to work unless you put them on slideshow presentation mode. If you're just looking at them in the other views, they're not going to work. So I please do want you to look at these videos, watch them. They help reinforce the topics that we're talking about in these lectures. So we'll keep going. When you say fish, you're talking about a bunch of different things. It's not just like one species or one group, it's a few groups. We're going to talk about the early tetrapods, and these guys are in them. So this is going to cover the agnathans, the chondrichthyes are cartilaginous, our osteichthyes are bony fish, and coelacanths, lungfish are kind of in their own little group. So it's lots of different types of fish when we lump everything together and just say the fishes. So we can see all the different groups, and we're going to get to those in the next lecture when we talk about specific groups. But in this lecture, I want to focus more on body parts, what fish do, what makes them special. So for the most part, these guys are going to live in the water, of course. When you think of fish, you think of water. There are exceptions where some fish don't live the majority of their life in water, or that they are capable of living outside of the water for brief amounts of time. So the mud skipper is one of these. I think they are personally so ugly, they're cute. They got big buggly eyes, and they will gulp down mud and the water involved in the mud, and that will help them be able to pull the air out of that water. And then there are snakeheads. Snakeheads are a type of invasive fish, and these guys can literally come out of the water and go to another body of water that is nearby, so they can cross over the land. So these are some exceptions to the rule that they're all in the water and they never come out of the water. Anytime I make blanket statements like that, there's always some kind of exception out there. So these are the exception for saying that they always live in the water and they never come out, because that's not true. In general, fish are cold-blooded. Can't say all the way because there are always exceptions. But for the most part, cold-blooded is going to mean that they're not like me and you. Me and you, we have a temperature that we maintain. We have homeostasis at about 98, depending on, some people run hot at 99, some people run at 97 or 96. But you are going to have a temperature that you maintain, um, and your body will maintain that, and you can cool yourself down or warm yourself up doing different things. Fish are not like that. They are poikilotherms. They don't maintain a total a body temperature at a set number. They are ectotherms, and they're going to derive their temp from what's around them, their environment around them. So if they live in cold water, their body metabolism is going to slow down and they're going to be cold. They're living in the warm water, things speed up. So their body temperature is dependent upon what's around them for the most part. Again, exceptions to the rule. There are some exceptions. Some of these guys, like sharks, we got the mako shark, we've got the great white shark. Um, Sailfish and tuna are also some exceptions where they are more like us. They run warm-blooded, and they will thermoregulate. If they get too warm, then they will rush the blood to their skin just like we do and use that to cool themselves down. So there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, in general, these guys are going to be cold-blooded. Fish are finny. They are finny. They're going to have lots of fins. So we're going to have the pectoral fins, these guys right here. We're going to have the pelvic fins. So below those are the pelvic fins, and they are paired. You're going to have one on each side of the fish, just like the pectoral fins. They will have anal fins way down in the back. They're going to have, we talked about in the beginning of the semester, dorsal and ventral. Ventral would be your belly, dorsal is the backside. So they've got dorsal fins up here. And then caudal, again, means tail. We were talking about those anatomy and physiology terms in the beginning of the semester. So here is his tail fin. When it comes to tail fins, different fish have different types of tail fins. So we are going to talk about a tail fin that could be all together. So we've got homocircle and dicircle, but both of these guys are going to be slightly different. So we got the dicircle is this guy where it's all together, but it's got this one little thing that bisects this universal lobe with a little bisecting piece out there. Homocircle is going to be this guy. And if we remember when we talk about homo and hetero, homo is going to be the same. So these guys have the even amount. This fin length is about the same as this fin length. They're the same size. Versus this other term that we've got up here, hetero, this hetero circle tail, like some of our sharks, like a thresher shark, for example, has a super long tail like this, and that long extension on the tail that they will use to stun their prey. So this is heterocircle is here versus homocircle here, where everything is the same. So two different tail types that I might ask you about on the test. Heterocircle, the lobes are uneven, and homocircle, the lobes are the same. So how do they get oxygen to their tissues? They are going to use gills. They'll have gills. Some of these guys may have a lung that they have modified from swim bladders. There's the lungfish, there's a catfish. Those are exceptions, but everybody in general is going to have these guys. They're going to have gills to get their oxygen. Fish, there are some scaleless fish. There are some scaleless fish out there, but for the most part, most of these have scales, and there's different types of scales. So there are 4 that I want y'all to know. We mentioned sharks before, so those are going to have this placoid style scale. It almost looks like, to me, it looks like a duck foot on these. And this is placoid. We're going to see them in sharks and the cartilaginous groups, sharks and rays and skates. They'll have this placoid scale type. Then there are ganoids. If anybody has ever seen an alligator gar, they are super cool fish if you've never seen one. They have like this long snout that looks like an alligator's mouth, hence the name. And they've got these big, gigantic, primitive looking scales on them. So those are ganoids. Gars have them, sturgeons have them. These kind of large triangular shaped scales. Then we've got the ctenoid scales. These are going to be more of our new modernish cool fish, new bony fish. And then more primitive fish are going to have our cycloid type scales. So you may have a question about different types of scales and know who has what kind of scale. What examples did we talk about? If we said ctenoid, sunfish, bass, darterfish might have them. If we were talking about cycloid scales, then we would talk about salmon or mullet, pike, little minnow fish. They've got those. We said sharks, skates, rays have placoid scales, and gars and sturgeons are going to have ganoid scales. We mentioned this before, having a lateral line. I think we talked about it in lab, and it's this line that you can see when you look at a fish up close. A lot of these fish will have this lateral line, and what it does is it senses pressure. It can sense current, and it can sense those pressure and vibrations in the water along the side of their body. And we've got a great video here that can go into that as well. So please, again, check out the videos. They've got some great information on them, but I'm not going to put them in this video. I'll let you watch them yourself. Some of these guys can generate their own electrical currents, which is pretty cool. And this website will take you to a link that shows you different types of fish that can generate their own electrical impulses. And then there are other types of fish that can sense electrical impulses, and those are called bioelectric. So if you look really close at this shark, and you can see his dark eye, he hasn't uh, covered it with his eyelid. His eye is checking you out, looking at you. He's looking at the camera. And if we look really close, he's got his little nares right here. Here's his eyeball. And on his snout, I'm saying it's a boy, it could be a girl shark, who knows? But there are these little freckles all on his snout. And these little freckly looking things are called ampulla of Lorenzini. And what they do is they are going to pick up on electrical signals. They can literally sense the signals. So it's pretty cool. It's something that fish can do. They can pick up on these signals and they can sense their prey. If it was, I think I've got a video later on about a stingray, and he's hunting, right? And he's hunting in the surface of the near the surface of the water, and then he goes down closer to the sand bed because that's where his prey is going to be. But you can't see his prey. His prey is hidden under the sand, and you can't see him. But the ray can feel him. He can sense his electrical signals because he's got the ampulla of Lorenzini, and he can sense his electrical signals, sense signals coming from his heart, signals telling his muscles to move, the heart to beat. They can pick up on those signals and use that to hunt down their prey. So that's pretty cool, and that's called bioelectric, that they can do that kind of feature. I think it's super cool. And it's ampulla of Lorenzini on the sharks, or canal of Lorenzini. This picture says canal. That picks up those electrical signals. So a neat thing that some fish are able to do. Another super cool thing that some fish are able to do, they can produce their own light, or they can bring in some sort of organism that produces its own light. So if they do it themselves, it's autogenic, or they could use a symbiont. So there's a chemical, and I can't remember where it was. I think it was called like ferrulin or something like that, but don't quote me on that. There's some sort of chemical that to bioluminesce, this chemical interacts with oxygen molecules, and that chemical interaction produces light. It's going to produce energy with this chemical interaction, and that produces light. So sometimes the fish can do this all by themselves. Other times they may bring in another organism that does this for them, like a certain type of bacteria or something like that in the water, and then those things will glow for them. But they can bioluminesce. Fish can do it themselves, or they'll bring in another organism that does that. But it's super cool. Like this anglerfish, if anybody who's seen Finding Nemo, I hope you all have. It's this great classic movie out there. That anglerfish is using bioluminescence to lure the prey in and then eats them. Size of fish, super big to super small. So whale fish, the whale shark, largest shark that we've got out there swimming in the oceans. And then we've got oil oar fish, also relatively big, greater than 8 meters. Here, this oarfish, pretty big. Small, on the small scale, we've got this teeny tiny little baby carp. And this little guy, carp, is kind of like the goldfish family is carp. So this guy is a really, really small one. He's only 7.5 millimeters, so not even as big as a centimeter. And centimeters, there's 2.5 centimeters in an inch. So this guy is super small. So they can be, and he's fully grown, living in little places in East Asia, little tiny pools, little tiny fish. So they can be very, very big, or they can be very, very small. Where are they living? Where do we find them? Everywhere. We know that the earth is covered in a large portion of the earth is covered in water, right? And it's covered in salt water. Salt water is 97% of all the water available is going to be salt water. So 58% of the species of fish are marine, obviously. And then there's 3% of the water on Earth that's not salt water. Out of that 3% is going to be fresh water. And how do we divide it up? We got water that's locked up as ice caps, it's frozen in glaciers. We got water that's under the ground at aquifers. And then the other 0.9% is going to be the surface water that the fish can actually live in. And that's going to include lakes and the rivers, and boggy areas like swamps. So 58% live in a huge, 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 vast area. Most of those guys are living at the surface, by the way. but some of them can live down low. The other 41% are living in a teeny tiny portion of available resources, but that's where the other 41% are. How many of them are there? If we add them all up, our jawless fish, our agnathans, our cartilaginous fish, our bony fish, if we add them all up, we've got roughly 28,000 different species of fish. And so if we compare those guys with all of the other vertebrates, here are fish right here, and then we're going to talk about amphibians and reptiles, birds, and mammals later on in other videos. But for the most part, out of all the vertebrates, fish are the most popular. We've got the most species of fish, with bony fish, or osteichthyes, being the most popular, the most diverse out of all the fish total. Georgia has about 325 species. They're going to be freshwater. We're not talking about the stuff off the coast of Georgia, but the freshwater species found in Georgia, there's about 300 of them. 8 of them are going to be federally listed. 57 are listed as endangered within the state. And then we've got 15 invasives, like we were talking about that snakehead fish. That is a type of invasive fish that's come over and going into places that it shouldn't be. 8 of these guys are endemic, and they're only found in small pockets within Georgia. How long do these guys live? If you are this cute little pygmy goby, you don't have a very long life. 56 days. It's not very long. 2 months. You got 2 months to grow from a little egg to a fry to a full-grown adult. 2 months. If you are this rockfish right here, though, 200 years, longer than all of us, is this rockfish. And if you were a koi have been recorded as 226. So my in-laws have koi. They built a pond in Kentucky and bought some koi fish, and they named them. One of them is called Jeep, and I can't remember the others' names, but they are pets. And then my in-laws moved to Georgia, and they moved those fish with them. And I have a feeling that I'm going to be the proud caretaker of Jeep and all of the other koi, because at 226 years, they're going to be my kids' pets too. So they can live really, really long time, depending on the species. Basic morphology, generic fish we have pictured here. We've got the mouth, going to swallow our prey down. It's going to go to the stomach. And then from the stomach, it's going to hit up with all of their accessory organs. We've got the spleen, we've got the liver going on. We got the pancreas. Food's going to come down. We'll get all the good stuff out of it, and then waste will go through. We've got the nervous system that is in yellow. Here, underneath that nervous system is going to be the dorsal aorta, so circulatory system going on. Got a teeny tiny little brain. It's not that big for the size of the organism, but you've got a little brain in there. Blood flow. The kidney is kind of cool. It runs along that dorsal aorta, so it is right around here, and that's going to filter all the blood going through that dorsal aorta, so they can filter and get the waste out and get rid of that stuff. A thing that we do need to talk about, and we're only going to see these things in bony fishes, is this thing. This is the swim bladder. So swim bladders are kind of cool. They, again, we're going to find them in bony fish, and we will see them because they help control buoyancy. It's like if anybody is a scuba diver and you have your BC, your vest, and you can inflate it or deflate it to help you with buoyancy control. It's going to help them not have to work as hard to stay in the water column where they want to stay. So it's going to help control buoyancy. It reduces energy costs. If anybody's watched videos of sharks, they're swimming, swimming, swimming. They're constantly moving. While our bony fish, they have that swim bladder, and that kind of holds them at least at a certain point in the water column, and then they could go higher or lower without a whole bunch of effort. So the swim bladder's pretty cool. We think that that is probably what was used as primitive lungs when we talk later about leaving the ocean and getting out onto land in our first early tetrapods in the next video. That swim bladder, we think, is getting converted into lungs. Why do some of these fish gulp water and some don't? Some of these guys are air breathers, and we divide those guys into obligate or facultative. So when you have those two terms, obligate or facultative, I always try and tell somebody Think about if you have an obligation. If you have an obligation to do something, you have to do it. You have to. If you are facultative, you can bounce back and forth. You could be wishy washy and decide whether you want to do it or not. But obligates have to do it. So, goldfish, if anybody had pet goldfish growing up, those things gulp air. They're obligate air breathers. They're going to gulp the air and supplement that with the oxygen that they're getting from their water in their environment. So, obligate air breathers have to gulp air and supplement it. Facultative, like the beautiful betta fish over here, does not have to, but they can. They can gulp air to supplement it, but they don't have to do it. Making sound. We were talking about that air bladder and that it helps them control their buoyancy. But another thing that it can do is it can help them bring in sound like a receiver, and that can send it to their ear, and so they can the sound waves hit the fish, and that swim bladder kind of channels the sound waves towards their ear, and it helps them hear sounds around them. And it also, they can make their own sounds. So if fish are grinding their teeth, then they can use that sound and amplify it through their swim bladder. So kind of neat things that they can do. They can also make sounds using that swim bladder. Fish muscles, fish musculature. If you have eaten fish and enjoyed fish, there are three different types of fish muscle that's out there, and it's similar to muscle in general. When we talked about muscle way back in the day on our anatomy and physiology lecture, we have the white muscle. That's going to be not a lot of blood flow, and that's why it looks white. It's not a lot of blood flow going to it. This stuff is for quick movements. For people, I always reference the muscles around the eye. Those are white muscles because you can twitch your eye and move it really fast for quick bursts of energy. So these guys are really fast. These white muscle is fast movements. So ambush predators, things that need to move out real fast, capture the prey, and then they can take their time and chill and eat the prey later. Or we've got the opposite. We've got the endurance ones. Those are going to be highly vascular. So the darkest red meat on a fish, that is your endurance meat. Something that's swimming all the time. It's using that muscle all the time. If we were talking about people, I'd talk about the leg muscles. If you're talking about chicken, there's white meat and dark meat, right? On chicken, the dark meat is the legs because it's working all the time. The white meat are the wings on the chicken. The chicken needs to be able to fly away really fast, at least a wild chicken, the domestic ones. That's a whole nother story. But the wild chicken needs that wings to be able to get up and away from its predators. So those are quick bursting movements, and that's white meat. So the breast on chicken's white, the legs, the chicken meat is red because that's for endurance. And then they have the mix of muscle tissue that is pink. It's a little bit of white, it's a little bit of red, it's a mix in between. So that's fish muscle in a nutshell. Digestive system, meat eater or plant eater. If you're an herbivore, your stomach's going to be a little bit smaller and you're going to have a really long set of intestines because you're trying to break down plant material, and plant material doesn't break down very easily. So you want a really long time in your intestines to break that stuff down versus the meat eaters. The meat eaters, if you're preying on other animals, you're going to have a bigger stomach that breaks it down the food and digests it at that point, and then a relatively shorter intestine to absorb those nutrients. So we talked about this before, herbivores and carnivores. It's the same thing that we see in the fish here. Reproduction. Oh, I need to fix this. I'll fix this before I upload it to y'all. But reproduction for fish, there's always a male fish and a female fish. Sometimes they look identical and it's hard to tell. I'll upload this with the picture of the shark because that's one that we dissected in lab and you could tell and see if it has a male fish or a female fish. But male sharks are going to have claspers where female sharks don't because they'll have internal fertilization going on. So it depends on the fish. You're always going to have males and females. You're always going to have different fish type, but the type of fertilization, the type of reproduction that they do, they may have internal fertilization, they may have external fertilization. Sometimes it's just looking really close at the fish to try and see if it's a boy or a girl, and sometimes you can't tell at all if it's a boy or a girl fish, but there are boy fishes and girl fishes. How do they have respiration? We said that they are going to use gills. and that they need to take the oxygen out of the water with those gills. How do they get the water across the gills? So one of them is going to be a form of just forcing, ramming that water through. So sharks, if you've ever seen videos of sharks and they're just running along with their mouth wide open, and you can see their scary sharp teeth dangling down, they're ramming the water through their gills. So open in mouth, swimming into the current, rams that water through, and that gets the water across their gills. Other guys don't have to be like that, but they do have an opening, and that opening is the spherical right here, that this little hole, and that they'll be able to get the water, funnel it through on those guys. And then the other one, our bony fish have operculums. So if you were one of the ones in lab that got to dissect the perch, one of the easiest ways to finally get in there was to remove the operculum first, that bony flap that sits next to their head and moves and allows the water to go across their gills. So 3 different pumps to get the water across the gills for respiration on fish. What how is their blood flow set up with this respiration type? It's called countercurrent exchange. So basically with countercurrent exchange, you're going to have one thing going one way and another thing going another way. So hence the countercurrent. They're going opposite ways. We are going to have oxygenated blood flowing in one direction, and we are going to have low deoxygenated blood going in another direction. And through diffusion, that oxygen level is going to go from the high to the low. Because we've discussed diffusion before, it's always going from a high concentration to a low concentration. So we're going to use countercurrent exchange. That's what fish are going to use to get that oxygen to diffuse across and go into all of the different tissues. So we've got a video on countercurrent exchange if you want to watch that for a little more explanation on that. But it's basically things going in different directions, and then you are going to use the fact that things are going in different directions and you've got a high concentration on one end and a low concentration on the other, that they're going to follow simple diffusion and go from high to low. Cardiovascular system, the blood is coming from the heart, and it is going to have an atrium, and it is going to have a ventricle. And so it is going to have these 2 chambers. And the way that it is set up, here's our ventricle, here's our atrium. Blood flow is going to come into the atrium. It always comes in the atrium, by the way. When we go into blood flow on all these organisms, you're going to need blood flow going through these, just like we talked about with the frog and the reptiles that we're going to get into. We're going to need no blood flow. So fish have a primitive heart. It's got an atrium. It's got one atrium. It's got one ventricle. Comes into the atrium, and then it's going to go down into the ventricle, and then it's going to leave the ventricle and be pumped out here. So it's going to hit the gills and it's going to oxygenate it. Yay! We finally got oxygen. We're going to bring that oxygen to all of the tissues here. All the tissues are going to pull the oxygen to the cells that need it. So all the cells, all the things that are working really hard are going to pull the oxygen from that. And then that blood is then going to come back to the heart. So if a fish is very stressed, if it's constantly stimulated, this tissue is going to be pushing out all the oxygen, and we're not going to get a whole lot of oxygen left to go back to the fish's heart, and that could cause the fish to die. So that's why they tell you not to stress out the fish and don't tap on the fish in the fish tanks at the pet store, because it stresses them out. Their tissues around them pull up the oxygen, and that deoxygenated blood, and most of the oxygen is pulled out before it makes it to the heart. There's not enough oxygen for the heart to continue, and that fish could die. So do know how many chambers of the heart does a fish have? It's got 2. It's got one atrium and it's got one ventricle. And then what's the system look like? It's this closed system. So it's a closed system, unlike the open system that we talked about with bivalves and stuff like that. So we got a closed system, and it's going to go in this one little track, hits up the gills, goes out to the rest of the body, comes back to the heart. So know the different parts. Sinus venosus, atrium, blood sits here. Then it's going to go through this valve. It's going to go here to the ventricle, and then it's going to go out the ventricle to the bulbous arteriosus and out to the rest of the gills, and then the body, and then back to the heart. So know these steps? This might be a question, it's probably a question on the lecture test. What structures is the blood flow hitting as it goes through the fish's body? Sinus venosus, atrium, ventricle, bulbous arteriosus, and out. Osmoregulation. How do these guys um, manage their water and the electrolytes that they need to maintain themselves? So, if you are a freshwater fish, what is outside of you is going to be more diluted than what's inside of you. So, water is constantly trying to come inside your tissues. It's constantly trying to come inside of your tissues because you're salty and the water wants to come inside and invade your tissues and make you as fresh water as the water is around you. So with the freshwater fish, it is making very, very dilute urine. It is trying to urinate out the fresh water constantly. It's not bringing it in because it's already naturally trying to come in to the fish, and we want to get it out. Fish wants to get it out to try and maintain its salt levels or anything else, any other ions it's got in its body. So it's going to make very, very dilute urine on a freshwater fish. All that fresh water is trying to get into the fish's body and invade, so it's going to try and pee it all out. On the other hand, if it is a marine saltwater fish, then it is going to try and keep the salt that it's got because what's around it is saltier than what's inside. It's going to take that and it's going to have concentrated urine. It's going to try and maintain all the fresh water that it's got inside of itself because it's surrounded by this salty water. So it's going to have concentrated urine. So it maintains the fresh water inside of itself um, and only gets rid of the salt. So a saltwater fish is going to have very concentrated urine. It wants to keep the fresh water where it's at and doesn't want to urinate that away and be dehydrated. So concentrated urine for saltwater fish, freshwater fish, dilute urine. All right, so that's going to finish up what I wanted to talk to y'all about in this first video. If you've got questions about any of this lecture content, please hit me up with an email. Um, Come visit me on office hours virtually, Monday, Wednesday, 9 to 11. I'm here. Check out the Zoom links, STEM 411. Let me know if you got questions about this stuff and do your weekly quiz. Everyone, please stay safe. And I will stop it here and we'll do the next video in a little bit about the major groups.